G'day, my name is Joel Rasmussen for Southern Cross Combat, and ahead of, well, a million and one different things, I'm talking to Mr. Eugene Bareman. Eugene, I thank you very much for the time. How are you this fine Thursday afternoon?
No, good. Great, mate. Just in between sessions at the gym, so it's a good time for us to catch up.
Yes, I thank you very much for giving me the time. You just mentioned there being in between sessions. What was the session earlier today?
I know I trained with some of my some of the pro fighters that I just took on pads and stuff, and then I ended that with a little bit of a meeting with my kids classes instructors, and we got together. So yeah, back home, quick bite to eat, pick the kids up from school, and then back in the gym, training more fighters, taking more classes.
Back to work. The grind never stops.
Yeah.
Talking about that, you were just in my neck of the woods last week. You were in Melbourne, cornering Mr. Navajo Sterling. I didn't get a chance to talk to you after that fight, but what did you think of Navajo's performance in that fight?
No, I thought it was a masterful performance, to be honest. I was very, very pleased with the way that he executed our plan, um, the way that he listened between rounds, but during rounds as well. And just his overall attitude towards that fight, given that that was a bit of a step up in competition for him. So, with every step up in competition, you have to step up yourself. You have to step up your training. You have to step up your attitude. You have to step up your professionalism, your approach. And I felt that he responded well. Yeah.
That was his for MMA. That was his international debut. He came across and fought in Australia. Uh, with that, you talked about how he kind of responded in that. How are you finding his development? And does that he has a successful kickboxing career? When you change into MMA, does that progress kind of carry over, or is it like a completely different thing?
Uh, it's no, a lot of it carries over. Obviously it's not the same sport, but it's a combat sport with very similar characteristics. And the your real job when you get a high level sort of combat sports athlete transitioning into MMA, your real job is to harness everything that he's learned and including all the skills, but mentally what he's learned in that sport and carry that over into MMA. So um, you can get to a certain point, like with that development, but then you actually have to do MMA and you actually have to put yourself in the pressure room, put yourself in the big fights. So, yeah, there's a lot of experience that Navajo draws on and that we draw on. But there's also the side of it that this is a new professional sport and he has to dip his foot into the water. Yeah.
What do you see as kind of being maybe the next step for Navajo?
Um, the biggest step he took with the success of that fight, in my mind, is that he was able to face a good, durable, seasoned opponent who he's not going to intimidate. He's not going to necessarily dominate. Who's going to give him problems? Who's going to stick around? And when you finally do face an opponent like that, what is your response? Are you going to respond like we want you to? Are you going to stick to the game plan, or are you going to implode just because there's a guy in front of you who's giving you some obstacles that you've never seen before in the sport? And as far as I'm concerned, his skills, standing up, um, his wrestling skills, anti-wrestling skills, his groundwork is at world class level. He can compete with the best guys in at the 205 division in the world. But that doesn't really necessarily translate to being able to just do that when it counts. And that's the big factor that last weekend's fight went a long way into kind of proving for us. So he can compete with the best guys in the world, and maybe he just needs a little bit more experience. But if he did jump in there, even just based on the results of the last fight, I would be confident if he was able to, get the call up for one of those big organizations in the world.
Talking about that, a fellow teammate of Navajo, Mr. Aaron Toe, he has received the call up. He will be on Dana White's Contender series. I just wanted to get your thoughts on kind of him and his development, and is he ready to go to that stage?
Yeah, I think Aaron's been ready for a while. I think Aaron's an amazing fighter. I think Aaron's, and Aaron's. What's really cool for me with Aaron is he's. You have to have a really deep understanding of the sport to understand what Aaron does well, because for you, I guess your average fan or person, or even your average coach, I guess you're just going to be looking at what they would consider the meat and potatoes, but the brilliance is in the subtleties, like what he's able to do to kind of sneak into range, what he's able to do to pull himself out of range, how he's able to manipulate that distance, how he's able to what he does in terms of his balance to manipulate the power that he's able to put out. Like there's all sorts of like really subtle things that Aaron does better than most people that walk into most gyms. And although to your average punter, they don't see much, if you come to the gym to any sparring session, you'll be seeing Aaron give everybody trouble from flyweight right up to middleweight and light heavyweight.
Do you think he's underrated?
And probably is a little bit underrated, I feel. But he shouldn't be underrated, not based on his results, but I think underrated in that, most people, including most coaches, they just don't understand. They don't understand the sport. So in that respect, maybe he is a little bit underrated.
You talked about, those skills that he possesses, the way he can move and do things. Do you think that's taught, or is that something inherent to him?
It's definitely taught, but the level at which it's comprehended and executed is natural. Some people get it and they do it to a very, very high level. Some people get it and they ever only reach a mediocre level with it, with the information that's taught. But he's able to take some of the learnings and take it to a next level. That part of it is definitely something innate, something he was born with there.
In the video that he posted announcing it, I believe you read the email on your phone and you pass it to Dan Hooker to read it out. And then Dan made a post about it. I was wondering, why give that to Dan? Do they have like a specific relationship?
Yeah, absolutely they do. I mean, Dan, for quite a few years, opened up his own gym. And out of that gym, he ran a scholarship program, which I believe Aaron won. And that was the vehicle, I guess, that Aaron used, because at the time he was living in Australia, that Aaron used to move himself back to New Zealand and start training and pursuing the sport very, very seriously. And so they built that relationship between each other at Dan's gym. So Dan was effectively his coach, and of course a lot of Dan's fighters, because Dan obviously being our fighter, we cross trained together. So, but my familiarity with Aaron was more just he would just come in and spar, and I would help him out here and there, and then obviously Dan rolled his gym up, and then Aaron came over to CKB full time. So I felt that, well, even though Aaron's had a long journey, a big part of his journey was coming back to New Zealand, and having Dan as one of his mentors. And I just felt that was the appropriate thing to do, to let Dan know, look, you've done a great thing. You've provided a great opportunity for Aaron to come to New Zealand. You've been a great mentor and coach for Aaron. And all CKP is doing right now is just developing the work that you've done. And I just thought it was appropriate for him to let Aaron know that here's your one step in the right direction, you're 1 foot in the door. So I just thought it was a fitting thing to do.
Talking about the two fighters we've spoken about so far, Navajo and Aaron, you've talked about their skills and kind of where they are. You're a man who may have seen more UFC talent than anyone definitely in the region, probably some of the most in the world. What makes someone UFC ready?
So skills is right up there. Okay, so like a very, very high level of understanding of skills and where they're what skills lend themselves to that particular fighter and that particular style. There's 1,000 fighters out there who have a skill set that isn't optimal for the way that they fight. But if you're talking about UFC, if you're talking about the absolute, top of the sport, there's also been 1,000 really skillful fighters that haven't made it. And so, when you're talking about UFC, and I don't really, when I talk about the UFC, what I'm talking about is the top 15 in the world. There's a lot of people in the UFC that that don't necessarily deserve to be there, or come and go, or have a shot and try their best and don't make it. When I refer to the UFC, I'm talking about like the top 15 of each of those respective divisions. When it comes to UFC, the skill part's not enough. You've got to have the mentality. Yeah, you've got to have that special sort of mindset that these fighters have, where they are willing to eat glass and piss blood, and give everything, every little essence of their life has to be pushed towards one goal, and that's trying to be the best fighter in the world. A lot of people, a lot of young fighters, a lot of fighters, they talk about how they've got that and how they have that mentality. But the truth of the matter is, only 1 or 2% of them actually truly do have that mentality. And that's proven because only a very, very tiny percentage actually get to the top. So the special coming together of a very refined skill set with a mental, fortitude that is the best in the world.
I asked you a similar question the first time I even met you, and you talked about how the average, more or less you said about how the average fighter thinks it's way easier than it is. Like, I'll just win some fights and then I'll make it. You talk about those qualities. Are those qualities something that you think people can learn, or you have it or you don't?
No, there's definitely learned. Yeah, it's definitely learned. But in saying that, Joel, some fighters have it within them to learn those lessons very, very quickly, because there's something about their personality, there's something about the way that they've grown up, there's something about the cloth that they come from, the cloth that they're cut from, that just makes them able to learn those lessons so much easier than other individuals. You can put that down to a number of things. I've never really pinpointed exactly what that is, but it's definitely learned. Some guys learn it the hard way, and some guys just almost seem like it's the natural part of them. Yeah.
Now, I've established, and anyone knows how essentially your career has been as a coach. About you've coached the very tippy top, but as I mentioned, you were down my neck of the woods just last week. You'll be flying off to Gold Coast, I imagine, pretty soon as well.
Yeah.
How are the feelings at the different levels when you're backstage as a coach? How does it feel to coach someone on their pro debut compared to fighting for a world title?
Yeah. I guess the thing that I love the most is that there's a certain part of it that translates across all of them. That's the same. And that's the great thing about the experience, is that I could be taking an ultra fighter for their first fight who's going to do one fight their whole entire career. He will be feeling the exact nerves that Israel Adesanya or Dan Hooker feel when they walk out. It's going to be that feeling right there before they walk out is going to be exactly the same. As far as that ultra fighter who's going for their first fight is concerned, that's the world championship, of the middleweight division or the lightweight division, as far as they're concerned, right? And that's what I love about it, is that moment there translates across everybody. But obviously, as you get further and further, higher up the echelons of the competition, there's just more and more on the line. And when there's more and more on the line, there's more and more pressure. And when there's more and more pressure, there is a greater need for you to have an appropriate response to that pressure. And pressure affects everybody. It affects, it affects fighters, coaches, cornermen, referees, judges, you name it. The pressure affects everybody. And then it's about just how we respond with that pressure. As the pressure goes up, as the competition gets to a higher and higher level, there's a more ruthless, cutthroat attitude amongst fighters, trainers, coaches, and teams. And that's, to be fair, that's the environment. That's how it has to be. When you have, all these big amounts of money at stake, careers on the line, the future of some of these young guys' families. Are we, this week, are we living off, $100,000, or are we living off $250,000 for the next 6 months? Like, these are proper pressure type environments. And so the attitude and the behavior becomes a lot more cutthroat and ruthless. And if you're not prepared to be in that environment, you'll get swallowed up. I mean, I see everyday cornermen and coaches at that highest level, they get swallowed up and chewed out. My colleagues at the top, there's a very small, esteemed bunch of them. And we see each other all the time. But amongst that group, you definitely see people come in and then they get spat out and chewed out really quickly. And then you never really hear about those people again. So it's pretty ruthless and cutthroat at the top. But as you're going up, there's a nice little journey there. And it's, there's a little bit more. So a little bit more of there's still a pressure situation, but when there's a couple $100 on the line and it's just an amateur fight, it's obviously a little bit different.
You talked about just then, that circle. There's a very few amount of people in the world who are kind of coaching at that top level. When you
Yeah.
get together with those people, what is that like? Because I have to assume there's very few people in the world that you can have those really high level coaching discussions with.
Yeah, I mean, it's respect. It's respect. It's there's like what carries across all of our, all of us is that same old story. Like the years and years and years of when we weren't in this position, when we were just in the gym every day. First person there, the coach is always the first person there. The coach is always the first person to leave. If the coach isn't outworking their athletes in that respect, then you don't get to the top. And so you have that bond where we've just all been through that hardship and those long hours and never knowing if you're going to get any success or not. We have that bond, and so we have that respect with each other. Um, there's no invitations going out to each other's weddings to be best men, but there's definitely respect amongst these people because of what they've done, the path that they've taken to get there, and their achievements. So, yeah, respect.
Talking about that consistency of people, and you said some people show up and then they get chewed up and spat out. I think City Kickboxing is in a very unique position because it's got both. It had someone like Israel Adesanya, long reigning champion, but also depth of fighters in the gym who are there. I know, as I just said, the gym's kind of got both, but which do you think is better? To have like one long reigning champion at a gym or like a bunch of guys who are UFC caliber?
Mm. That's a very good question. Um, Not trying to avoid the question, but what I think is better is, and obviously I'm just going to be coming from a slightly biased point of view, but what I think is better is to have a team of very, very like minded, highly motivated individuals. And then a bunch of senior guys like me and my coaches to take all those like minded, highly dedicated individuals and amalgamate and glue them into a team. Because you can have a whole bunch of like minded individuals, highly skilled individuals, highly motivated individuals working as individuals, and they will not reach anywhere near the success of a whole lot of them working together. It's one of the big things about MMA and combat sports is that people think that it's a individual sport. People think it's an individual sport because you're jumping into the actual competition individually, but uh, a team couldn't be more important in any other sport to get you to that dance and get you and make you successful. So I think a team of like-minded individuals is far, far superior than just one long reigning champion. Um, and if you're lucky enough to have a bunch of those guys in there being, high level UFC fighters, then that's even better, right? Because you've got other athletes that have reached the top. Yeah, bit of a long-winded answer, sorry, Joel, but
No, not at all. It's fascinating.
yeah,
Um, Talking about kind of that roster and that wide net that City Kickboxing provides, just even
mm,
looking at the UFC level. By my count, at UFC Sydney, there was 6 gentlemen on the card who were fighting out of City Kickboxing. I hope I
yeah.
got that count correct. Uh, when you're going into that and you're coaching all those guys, some of them are back to back. What was that day like for you outside of the results? But
Yeah.
just knowing, okay, I have to coach 6 of these guys in a row at the highest level.
Yeah, that was madness. That was madness. And I probably wouldn't do it again. But to be fair, I wasn't gonna take away that opportunity for us to have that little bit of history and for the boys to the team and the boys to be a part of that. I feel like that will live on forever. But would I do it again? Probably not. It was just too, you know, if you're doing this job properly, the amount of time I've got to spend in this office right here with my other coaches talking and looking at fights and trying to figure out the direction we think a fight should go or the multi directions a fight should go. Um, it's just draining. It's just difficult when you've got that many on the card. And this is just the build up. This is before we've even arrived for fight week or even the day of the fight. So if the build up's hectic, you can imagine what it would have been like on fight week and fight day. But still, and nothing in the team's preparation or our preparation I can fault. We did just as good a job as we always usually do. Not all the results went our way, obviously, but that's no fault in the preparation or because we took on too big a workload. It just means that I probably wouldn't take on that workload again because it was just too much. Yeah.
Throughout fighters' careers, especially as they, there's more footage of them as they reach UFC levels. It's more people can see them, and I think it's easier for people to look at a fighter and watch them develop. As a coach, how have you developed? Everyone sees a fighter develop and wow, he does this now. But as a coach, over your time, how have you evolved as a coach?
Well, I've developed with my fighters, and I've developed with the sport, which is one of the great things. One of the great things about the sport is just information, right? Like I was lucky enough. I've still got in my garage. I've got 200 or 300 videos and another 200 or 300 DVDs and boxes that I just refuse to get rid of because they were such a big part of my life at one time. You know, there's going to be people watching this that don't know what a VHS is. I've got 300 of them, and I've got a 300. There's going to be people on this podcast that don't know what a DVD was. I just sourced information from every possible corner of the earth and every avenue I could, and I learned and learned and learned. Nowadays, it's so easy. Like, it's crazy how easy it is to be a coach nowadays. It's crazy. In fact, nowadays, how crazy is this? Nowadays, all that information has created another huge problem for coaches. And that is the fact that there is too much information. And now you have the problem of that I'm sure a lot of coaches, a lot less experience than me have, of figuring out what is legitimate information that you should be taking on board and what is absolute horseshit. Because that is one of the most difficult things to see on social media, I'm blessed, not because I don't have social media, but every now and then I'll be in a position where I'll be having a look. And nowadays it's crazy. It's crazy. You can access information so crazy, but all that easy access has also made it crazy for all sorts of crazy information to be put out into the atmosphere. Like there's coaches out there online, just crazy stuff. Do this, and if this happens, do this, and what if they fall over? And then it's just now you have the opposite problem, where now you have to be able to decipher all this information. So yeah, how I again went a bit off topic there, but I just stay diligent with my study. I keep studying, and obviously, through my experience, I've learned what to study and what not to look at. And I also just love being a student. Uh, uh, any any knowledge acquisition that I've gained over the years has been because I love studying the sport. And like like I said, I've got a huge library here. I've got there's every book in this library's all about fighting and boxing history and technique. I've got books here that are I've got books here that are some of these books are 150 years old, and I bought them from the furthest corner of the earth because I thought I might be able to garner just the tiniest little bit of information out of them that might help me and my fighters. Look at this old book here, Joe Lewis, How to Box. You've just got to be a student of the sport. So that's how I keep myself relevant. And I also surround myself with other very smart men who have the same enthusiasm for me as me for learning and combat sport, learning new information and discussing combat sports 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Talking about those books, I see plenty of fighters quote Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I've read The Art of War.
I've got the books here, back here somewhere.
How, like you said, you scrounge the earth to find these books to get the most minuscule information.
Yeah.
How much does that apply? How much does a war strategy book apply to fighting?
Okay. So mindset's a crazy thing, right? And at a certain point, you get to a level of the sport where everybody's very skillful and everybody's very strong, everybody's very fast, all their physical attributes are maxed out. And what's going to separate you is your mindset. And if you get a young fighter and he's read a quote from the Art of War that is resonating with him and gives him that extra, dials him in, just that extra little bit that helps him win a fight, then has that lesson been worth learning? I'm going to say 100% it has. And in the same respect, I've got this phone stacked on a book about the famous black boxer Jack Johnson. Then I've got another one here, Champions and Challengers, 100 Years of the Queensberry Boxing, Brutal Artistry. Likelihood is I'm not going to get much information out of all these books about boxing and pugilism. But if I can garner just the tiniest, tiny little thing, and the end result is someone's able to win a world championship with that little bit of information that I've garnered, not only is it fun trying to gain that information anyway, but then it's been well worth it, right? Because at the pointy end of the sport that I'm dealing with, what separates us is literally nothing. And if it's a chapter in a book, how amazing would that be?
Something about, I don't know how many people know about you, but prior to being a coach, you were a competitor yourself. Do you think being a fighter was important to make you such a great coach?
Personally, I do. Personally, I cannot see how. I can't see how that is possible to become a coach and be the best, most effective coach without having competed. And yeah, I mean, I was lucky. Like, I fought. I came from a time in the sport that it was very hard to get information on the sport or information about where to train or where to learn the sport. And so I came from a time where the only people that really walked in the gym were people that genuinely wanted to pursue the sport and be a fighter. They didn't want to do it because they had seen some flashy fighter with gold chains and living the high life somewhere. That was not their motivation to do it. You couldn't see that anywhere. You could watch it. You could just watch old stuff on VHS, and if that tickled your fancy, then you somehow found your way to a gym. So I came from a different generation of guys. The guys walking through the gym nowadays, they're highly informationed up, and they've got very preconceived ideas about what the sport can do and what the sport can bring to you. And some of them are jumping into the gym. And look, any reason to get in the gym is a good reason, but your mindset's a little bit different when, you know, 20, 25 years apart, when you come in because you've seen some flashy social media stuff and some of the stuff that the UFC puts out versus you just see an old grimy video on VHS of Hoist Gracie fighting Sakuraba. You can barely make out, it's all blocky. You can barely make it out. And then you have to look in a thing called the yellow pages to find a gym, or you can't Google a gym. You have to. It's just two different mindset of people that we're dealing with there for the most part. So I struggle to see how you can be the best coach without having experienced what your fighters have been through. So I mean, yeah. I mean, the obvious example that everybody's going to use here is going to be John Danaher, right? Who is, who's quite famous for teaching a very high level of jiu-jitsu and not ever competing in jiu-jitsu. But as good and as great as he is, would he be better? Would he be even better, as good and as great as he is, had he had competed? And I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes. As good and as great as he is, he would have been he would be an even better coach if he had competed. That's not no mock on him. He's probably the best jiu-jitsu coach in the world. But I guess I'm hypothesizing, if he had competed, would he be better? And I personally think he would have. So I just think that you have to, if you want to be the best possible coach that you want to be and reach a high level, you have to have competed.
In the Stylebender documentary, there's an interesting exchange that kind of happened. Something you say that I found really fascinating. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was kind of essentially you said your relationship with your fighters is interesting because you're not their dad, but you're not their friend. You kind of exist in this like in between. And although I haven't been in the sport for an overly long time, I've seen instances of fighters asking their coaches permission to do things like you would ask your father. What, with that idea, I don't know if it's a question if I asked you to just kind of elaborate on it, but kind of what is the relationship between you and your coaches? Because you're not their father, but you're not exactly just a friend.
Yeah. Yeah. So I personally think that there has to be some sort of bond of friendship with a fighter um, to optimize the teacher-student relationship. There has to be some form of a bond of friendship. And I say that because you have to respect the person you're training if you're going to put so much dedication and time into them. And you have to know them a little bit, like quite a bit more intimately than just your average coach would, someone paying their gym fees and coming in and going out, an hour later. But I also understand that you always put your friends in a certain box and they sit in a certain kind of laneway in your life. And I also believe the coach can't be in that lane. He is not one of your peers. He is not, he is not one of your mates that you can just throw jibes at and muck around with. So then there lies the difficulty, right? You do have to get to know the fighter quite intimately, but you can't get to know him so intimately that you become one of his close friends and you can just give each other shit. And there still has to be a few degrees of separation. And I think over the years, I think that's just something that I've learned to do. I've learned how far to step over that boundary and when to pull it back. And I think I've got a very good, healthy relationship with all my fighters. I think I don't overstep the mark. I'm not too demanding, but then I'm also not, a brick wall. They can come to me and they can show me their personality. They can let me know when there's stuff going wrong. It's a very kind of difficult kind of play-by-play that we have to kind of work there. There will be times over the years that I've overstepped and I've been a little bit too authoritative on someone, and there are times where I've gotten to know someone too well and I've pulled myself back, and I'm always playing that little bit of a balance to make sure that it's a healthy relationship. There's some friendship there, but there's also the coaching side of it that has to be respected too. I think for the most part, I'm playing that balance pretty well. You have to ask the guys, I guess.
Not to just continuously quote things back you've said to you in things I've seen. But while I was over in New Zealand, I was fortunate enough to have access to NZTV, and I watched Relentless while I was over there.
Oh yeah.
And something I found very interesting, especially from an international perspective, it does feel like that City Kickboxing and New Zealand MMA are like synonymous. It really feels like you guys are representing the whole country, and you are on the highest level. But in that series, you take the fighters to all different gyms around the country, and yet again, I can't remember the exact quote, but you talk about this concept of you feel you've had a lot of success, and it kind of sits on you to share that success with the rest of the country and the other gyms. I was wondering, what is that like? Because on a regional level, when like your guys are fighting each other, but on another level, you kind of talked about feeling this need to share the love.
Yeah, I mean, just like in Australia, New Zealand's no different. There's a lot of bullshit politics that have to do with the sport and have to do with personalities in the sport. They're big personalities and stuff. And the reason I'm saying that is because I do believe a certain part of my team has transcended that bullshit and that we are not representing our gym anymore. We are representing our country. There's going to be some people that in this industry in New Zealand that we're like, whatever. We don't believe that. But trust me, that's how we feel. Trust me, that's how the guys feel. Trust me, that's what thousands and thousands and that's what hundreds of thousands of Kiwis feel. And that's the sense of responsibility that we put on ourselves, that we're not representing our gym anymore. We're representing our country, just like the All Blacks or the Kiwis or the Silver Ferns do. That's what we think. We believe that we are doing. We are representing our country, and when we go out there, we go out to try and do that, proudly. But I am also acutely aware, more than most, that without the combat sports scene and the combat sports community in this country, and it's a great one, by the way, Joel, it's one of the best in the world. My team does not exist. It simply doesn't exist. I don't exist because my coach doesn't exist and his coach doesn't exist and all my fellow coaches under the same reasoning, they don't exist. We exist because of the people that set this community up going back years and years and years, way before my time. There's no Israel Adesanya if there's no founding fathers of this combat sports in New Zealand and all these local gyms. It's a symbiotic relationship. We need them. All the gyms need each other to compete and get to the highest level. So as much as there's all this bullshit politics amongst some of these gyms around here, it's funny because the fact is we need each other. Without each other, you can't exist and be a gym or a fighter on your own. You need each other. So sometimes we need to put all the bullshit and the politics aside and just get on with the sport and get on with making our young fighters a lot better. But that's the position I see CKB. I believe for me, we're a Kiwi gym. Like we represent the country when we go out there. Sure, we have many fighters. We have the most fighters in this country representing ourselves on the local level, but we also have the most international fighters. And when they go out there, they don't just wear CKB on one shoulder; they wear the Silver Fern on the other shoulder. So that's just our mentality. Yeah.
You mentioned how good the history and the combat sports scene is in New Zealand, and you talked about it being you guys no different. Your guys at CKB no different to the All Blacks or any team representing New Zealand. I wasn't sure if I was going to ask you this question because it's very kind of Australia based, and I understand, but I feel like it's not like that at home. And I don't know how often you get a chance to come to Australia and how often you stick around and see things, but how is that for you when you come here? Because I feel like New Zealand embraces combat sports way more than Australia does.
Yeah, definitely. There's way more segregation in the Australian fight scene, but I mean, it's a way bigger scene. So, I mean, as small as the New Zealand scene is and as much politics as we have, we're very small. So we're in many ways, we don't experience a lot of that, but just because of the sheer, size of our fight community, it's quite small. Well, you go to Australia where it's 10x. So you've got 10x the amount of personalities in the room and you've got 10x the amount of gyms, 10x the amount of population, 10x the amount of shows, 10x the amount of promoters, managers, coaches competing with each other. And that's basically where it comes from. It comes from just the sheer volume of the fight scene in Australia is bigger. So there's, the bigger fight scene, bigger amounts of bullshit going on, really. So I think that's more where that comes. But I mean, like, the thing is, one of my big bits of advice for any coach or fighter going through their local fight scene and carrying on to international level, whatever, is one of the big things I did, and it off-puts a lot of people, is I don't listen to no one. I don't care about nothing. It's one of my biggest, if you want to be successful, don't look back in the rearview mirror and worry about what people say and what people's opinions are. Because if you are the type of person that does that, you just won't get to the top. Because as you find success, and I've learned this over the years, not everybody celebrates and enjoys your success. Some people hate it. That when I 5 or 6 years ago, when I was still relatively new to this level of the sport, that probably used to get to me a little bit too much. And then I realized that I figured it out. A part of any success is these people just hating your success, even though they've never met you. They've never met you as a coach. They've never had a coaching conversation with you. They've never done it. They just, for no other reason other than you're successful and they're not, they absolutely hate you and everything you do and everything about you. Well, what can you do about that? You've just got to just go forth on your journey, ignore all of that, don't pay it any attention. I'm lucky I don't have social media and stuff. That's part of the reason why I don't have social media, because it's very hard to be successful when you're always listening to other people's opinions, and those people's opinions don't count. Australia has, although I am, and I'm biased, I don't think the community works quite the same as in New Zealand because it's a lot bigger. Australia's still a beautiful combat sports community, still a wonderful combat sports community. They still have great promoters. There's still great people in the sport. The greatest people I've met on this earth invariably have one thing in common, and they all come from combat sports. Okay, and they all come from a combat sports background. This sport attracts some of the most beautiful people you ever meet in your life. And Australia has a great scene full of great people and heaps of great fighters. And Australia's going to produce, some really great fighters in the next coming years based on what I see on some of those shows when I go over there. So all bodes well, I think.
You said it was something that 5 years ago when you were newer to this level, it did bother you, and now it doesn't. How do you learn to not care?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna let me just correct that a little bit. It bothered me a tiny bit. It bothered me a tiny bit. The reason I got here because I didn't give two fucks about what people said and their opinion on what I was doing. I just cared about the people's opinion that counts, and that was the people around me. And just as well I did, because that got us to the top of the world. Not caring is so difficult, and I'm lucky because I guess you could call me a little bit old. So I never had a phone growing up, and I never had, like I come from the good old days, Joel. Like you're only a young fella, but in the good old days, if you wanted to say something bad about someone, there was only one way you could do it. You had to walk up to them in the playground and say it to their face. And guess what happened, Joel?
You're punched in the head.
No one ever said anything because you would get a punch in the head. So no bad opinions and none of these people ever existed because there was consequences. You know what I mean? And of course, nowadays is a very different world. Nowadays, you can say something to someone and you can be on the other side of the world, and there's no repercussions and there's no reason. So I came from a very different world where I think it was a bit easy for me to develop that inside of me, where I just didn't care. But let me say this: like, I also was lucky enough to get advice and research advice and come across advice that was very similar to the advice I just gave everybody. Most, if not all, of the most successful people in this world, in any industry, any pursuit, didn't listen to the opinions of people that didn't count. And that was part of their success, is that they surrounded themselves with the right people, didn't listen to the wrong people, let those people guide them, and ignored all the hate and all the opinionated people who wanted to rip them down, and they just forged ahead. If you know that is part of the formula to success, then a lot of these young fighters and young coaches should take that on board.
I don't mean to switch gears here too much, but we've talked about fights in the past. We've talked about your attitude towards all these things. And you talked about when you refer to the UFC, you refer to that as kind of being the top 15. Carlos Ulberg was going to fight the number one guy. Then Jamal pulled out. He's now fighting someone who is still ahead of him, but only by one. Does that affect how you kind of view that fight at all in terms of like how good of a fight it would be for Carlos?
Not really. Not really. Um, Only ever so slightly in my mind. Like, he would have definitely got a higher ranking. Um, he would have got a lot more eyes on him had Connor been fighting, like things like this. But they don't. These things don't really count. What separates why it's the top 15 is because what separates the top 15 is nothing. Is nothing. By the time you get to the top 15, what separates number one from 10, one from 14, two from 13 is actually these guys could all be champions of the world on any given day if they're given the opportunity. All Carlos has to do is just hang around in there, get a few successive wins, and then he'll be at the top. You look at an example like Steve Erceg, who was not ranked anywhere near the top, and then all of a sudden got a title shot. There's nothing that separates, and nearly won the championship. Coming from 14, 15, the top from wherever he was ranked, it was at the lower end of the top 15. I don't know exactly. Man, nothing is separating these guys when you get into the top 15. So now we've got a guy who's ranked one below Carlos, I think. But what does it mean? It means nothing. He's arguably a harder fight than Jamal Hill, even though he's lower ranked. So the rankings, once you get to the top 15, the only thing the rankings mean is they get you a little closer to the title. But in terms of the difficulty and the gauntlet you have to face in terms of the competitors, it's all the same. Yeah.
Before I ask this question, I mean it with full respect to anyone who's ever competed, because I sure as hell aren't. We've talked about how much of it is skill, how much of it is mentality. And you talk about that there from your perspective. Anthony Smith is a harder fight than Jamal Hill. How much of a fighter's success is also just like good timing and like a good string of wins?
There's such a thing as timing. Okay, there's such a thing as opportune timing. Okay, but there's also such a thing as if you just hang in there and grind and work and dedicate and have this one track, one focused mind, you will get there. Okay, but yes, it's something that's not the be all and end all of your success, but it's something that can help you and boost you a lot. As a perfect example, we can look at Carlos. Carlos has just been working away and grinding and, pushing and, like trying to find the next opportunity, Reyes pulls out, Minifield pulls out, Carlos pulls out, Minifield finally gets done, goes into the Minifield fight with a slight injury, wins the Minifield fight, opportunity with Jamal comes up, Jamal pulls out, Anthony Smith comes in. There's a perfect example. Jamal Hill, previous contender for the title. This is an example of someone who was grinding away, and now some opportunities and a path has been created, and he's jumping on it. So it does have a lot to do with your success. But do I think that even without that pathway, Carlos would eventually have risen to the top of the sport? I do think yes, he would have. But that's not to say that opportunities don't have a big part to do with the success of a fighter's career. So, yeah, there is a part of that. But I think as fighters and coaches, you can't rely on it, because the thing about those opportunities, you don't know when they're going to happen or if they're going to happen.
The first time I spoke to you at CKB, we were talking about a variety of things, and I can't remember what the context was, but I said something along the lines of, and if Izzy's fighting in Perth, and I felt like you gave me a look that was like, if. Like, come on, really? Like, if? That is obviously now confirmed, and it's all locked in. But how long has that fight been in the works?
Just forgive me, because I am the wrong person to talk to about how long a fight has been negotiated. I just stick my head in the gym and go to work, and then I get a date. But I believe a long time before it was announced. Yeah, I'm talking, um, you know, 3 or 4 months ago long. Yeah, that I believe that fight has been locked in. Um, yeah, so I believe it's been locked in for a long time, and that's what we've been working towards. So, yeah, long time.
I'm conscious that the answer to this question may get you many text messages. Um, but something I wanted to know, we've established kind of how, influential and how core to this area CKB is. When the UFC is coming to town, because those events get planned way in advance, how far out from an event getting announced do you find out that the UFC is coming back?
Again, I'm the wrong person to ask about exact timing and stuff. I just live in such a bubble. But let me just give a broad answer that way before all of you guys know. Yeah, yeah, way before the public knows, or way before. And then obviously we have that information, and it's expected of us to not leak that information, and and go on our own little escapade with the media. So, but ordinarily, um, long before you guys know. I mean, at at its longest, nine or 12 months before you guys know. Yeah, sometimes. But in saying that, on the odd occasion, sometimes after you guys know, on the odd occasion, but for the most part, yeah, long before you guys know.
Case in point, I know not to dig, and I understand that, but I assumed you're not watching like the UFC live stream, and they're like, "We're coming to Perth," and you're like, "Oh, I guess they're going to Perth." I assumed you would know before.
Yeah, but there has been a few like that, is what I'm saying. There's been a few that I'm really like shocked. I mean, like, wow, no one let us know about that one.
We talked about social media. It's been a theme of this whole conversation, and about the negativity that it can bring. With this fight with Israel and Dricuss, in like the last time they were kind of going to fight each other, there was a lot of intensity. It got uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Do you think it'll happen again now that they're actually signed to fight each other?
no. If you're talking about the exchange in the ring, in the cage after, was that after Driscoll's fought, or was
Yeah,
it
after
after?
Dricuss beat Whitaker.
Yeah, oh, man, obviously I wasn't there. Um, no, I think that was just weird. I couldn't understand the whole thing. I thought it was just weird, mate. I saw little clips of that. I was like, mate, what is going on? It just looked. It was just weird. Like how I looked at that was, my old mate just had one too many bourbons, and then yeah, don't don't ask Israel to jump into the cage after he's been on the whiskeys or the bourbons. Like that's just dumb. I wouldn't get him to walk my dog after he's been on the bourbons or whiskeys. I wouldn't get him to walk my dog to the litter box. So I don't know. I just thought the whole thing was a bit weird. That's what you get if you ask a drunk guy to jump in the cage and promote a fight. I don't know. I very much leave that to Izzy. The whole promoting part, I very much leave to the Izzy, and I leave to all the boys. I don't have a particular interest in the fight. Some of these young guys, I might say something. Some of these guys that are new to the UFC, but most of them are pretty psychologically, mentally developed by the time they're in the UFC. They know what they're doing. If they start playing games with their opponent and, they start going back and forth, for the most part, they're doing it intentionally because they're trying to get some sort of edge, and I don't really have to interfere with that. I don't really want anything to do with it. Again, I came from an era where you fought as gentlemen, and if there was one word exchanged before a fight, then the fight never happened because you ended up fighting before that. And certainly afterwards, you weren't allowed to say anything because then you ended up fighting again. So it's a different era. Like you just now these guys just talk shit and it's just normal. I can't vibe with that, to be honest.
You kind of just said it there, but it is yet again, it is kind of a theme of style bender. Towards the end of that documentary, you talk about the differences between you and him in terms of social media and stuff. How is that for you? Does it ever get to a point, and it kind of ties in with the whole I'm not your dad, but I'm not your friend thing. Do you ever get to a point where you're like, hey man, like lay off Twitter? Or is that something where you're like, you're an adult, you can make your own choices?
Nah, I don't have anything to do with it, mate. I don't watch his social media. I don't watch any of the boys' social media. To me, it's abhorrent. I don't like it. I think it's ridiculous. Some of the stuff that these guys put up. It's also, if people do send me some funny stuff for them, and I'd give them a lot of shit about it. So it's some good ammunition for me in the gym. But I don't even know what's going on half the time with these guys' social media. It's just looking at their social media would be a waste of my life. Yeah.
How important is what's a motivator is for a fighter? Let me word that better because that was horrible.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, like, we've talked about Carlos, and you've talked about, like, he's a very much a guy who's on the hunt. He's on the come up, Same with Navajo is chasing that UFC. Aaron is now chasing that contract. Israel has spoken about how he's not interested really in the belt anymore. It's more specific fights. From the perspective of a coach, does what motivate a fighter matter?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two schools of motivation. There's the motivation you have to have within the realm of your fight career, but then you have to have your motivation that's just slightly outside the realm of your fight career, and that is, why are you fighting? Why are you fighting? You're motivated when you're in the fight scene because you want to be the best in the world, okay, as an example. But then why do you want to be a fighter? Why do you want to be the best in the world? What are the reasons? Why were you pushed towards this sport, one of the hardest sports on the planet? Why were you pushed to do this? Why didn't you play rugby or soccer or golf? And those two reasons for motivation are very, very important to a fighter and their success. So, for most fighters, why they get into fighting is to support their family. Massive tool and vehicle that you can use to gain success. And then for most fighters, when they start fighting, they want to be the best at what they do. And that's going to be, I want to be the best in Melbourne. I want to be the best in Victoria. I want to be the best in Australia, the best in the Pacific. I want to be the best in the world. I want to be a UFC champion. Motivation, your reasons for doing the sport are key to your success. Israel Not interested in belts. Yeah, I mean, what are you interested in? Israel's interested in being the best in the world, and the person who's best in the world right now, which is why we have a bout, is Dricuss. So I think that's more what he's alluding to. That the bout happens to be there to legitimize that you're the best in the world, but he doesn't really care about it. He more cares about the scalp. That if you and a lot of people consider Dricuss to be the best, and I want to be the best on the planet, then that's the guy that I want. I want that guy's scalp. Yeah.
So you've kind of just spoken about it there, but hearing him say he doesn't care about belts anymore, that isn't something that necessarily worries you.
No, because he's correct. Like the bout, the actual, he's more talking about the physical bout, so to speak. Less about the fact that the person who has the bout is considered the best in the world. That's why we have the bout, to legitimize that that person's the best. He's still hugely obsessed with being the best, the number one guy, which is represented by whoever has the bout. But what he's saying is, I'm not worried about the bout. I'm worried about Dricuss, the individual, bout or no bout. He's considered number one, and that's my spot. Yeah.
I believe he has used the phrase that he's said he's in the twilight of his career. He wants to end strong, end it very well.
Yeah.
Has that something you've spoken to him about?
Yes. Yes, definitely. The twilight of career has to be approached and like planned out a lot differently to the beginning of your career. So we've talked about it extensively, and I believe that mindset wise, it's good for him to be in that place, to know that you can't be a fighter hanging around thinking that you've got another 10 years in the sport. It's good to know where you are at one particular time, because it helps shape what the future looks like. Yeah.
Fans can kind of, hold on too long. We want this, we want this, we want this, because fans aren't connected. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. You
Yeah.
have this relationship with these fighters. How is that for you when he approaches you and says, "All right, we both know everything comes to an end." How is that for you? Is that like sad? Like, what are your emotions when you hear that?
Not one of sadness. Not one of sadness, because it's crazy. If it ended tomorrow, his achievements are crazy. And where we've come from is crazy. You know what I mean? So if it ended tomorrow and I wasn't happy with what me and him have achieved, then whatever is going to make me happy? If it ended tomorrow, he reached the top of the world and he put a stranglehold on that middleweight division for years, for years. So, and some of the things he achieved and some of the fights he had were amazing. They'll live on through the history of time forever. Like it's not. I haven't really been when talking about such a subject. I haven't been overwhelmed with sadness. And I don't think I will be. I think when I reflect, it's going to be like I'm going to have to. And the thing is, I don't often reflect, which is part of the reason when I do, it's quite amazing to me. I have to pinch myself. So that's all that's going to happen when the final curtain falls and we get to finally sit back and reflect. All that's going to happen is I'm just going to pinch myself and go, mate, look what we did. Absolutely mind blowing, astonishing.
You said you don't often reflect. Could you ever see yourself maybe writing a book and maybe it joins the library that you're currently sitting in?
fuck, I'd love to write a book, but I I haven't been a student for more than 20 years. I would have to get a ghostwriter. I'd have to get someone else to write it, mate, because just like all skills in life, if you don't practice them, you lose them. I couldn't write my own name right now, Joel. All I'm good for is holding pads at the moment.
I know I would definitely read that, and that'd be something I would love to see. We've spoken about August, but let's talk about this weekend. John Vake steps in, fighting for the Eternal title. We've talked about motivators. We've talked about all that. From your perspective as a coach, what is John Vake chasing?
Yeah, I mean, look, John Vake he's chasing his dream. Like he wants to. John is a very, very, very. Let me say first, he's a very, very beautiful person. He's one of the, he's one of the best men that I've ever met. But John wants to be the best. And what the amazing thing about John is John's had big hiccups in his career. And the amazing thing is he has jumped back on the horse every single time and gradually and slowly improved himself as a fighter and taken something away from all those losses. If he can win that welterweight world championship, it takes him a little step closer. He effectively, the Eternal title, probably along with the Hex title, probably the two most prestigious titles, arguably the Eternal title, slightly more prestigious in the region. And yeah, that just gets him a little step closer to what he's trying to prove to everybody and to himself, that he's the best welterweight in our region at the moment. But yeah, fantastic guy, great story. We'll be flying over there to, try and help him achieve his dream.
On UFC Sydney Media Day, I asked Kevin Jousset about it, and I asked, I believe it was Shane Young. I asked him who should fight for Kevin's vacant title, and both those guys gave me either of the Vake brothers. Either one of them could.
Oh yeah.
Do you think, like, similar kind of what I asked about Aaron? Do you think maybe John's like a little bit underrated in the scene because he's had those hiccups?
John's definitely underrated in the scene. And the thing about John is, like we see John in the gym every day, and we see John's performances in the gym, and they are the best in the world. John can compete on any given day, can be on beating Kevin, dominating Kevin, holding Carlos down, out wrestling, the best grapplers and wrestlers in the gym, beating the best guys that stand up in the gym. What John's job is to translate what we see in the gym, the performances we know he can push himself to, in the cage. And saying that, that's just the journey of most fighters, is to translate what they can do in one certain environment into where it counts, and that's under the lights. If John finds his form and does what he can do, what we know he can do in the gym on Saturday night, then I can just go to sleep in the corner, because I just know the young fella he's fighting just won't. There's just the young fella he's fighting is just there for a ride. He's just an actor in John's play. Okay, but that's the challenge, and the young fella's a really good fighter, and so he'll be trying to spoil that. But the reason the guys speak and highly tout John is because they've seen his potential in the gym, and they've seen him ragdolling some of the best fighters in the world, and they want him to replicate what he does on the training mat in the cage. And when he does that, you can throw any welterweight in the world with him, as far as I'm concerned. Mm.
I don't believe as a fighter or as a coach at any level, anyone gets anywhere without any hard work.
Yeah.
As I said, I saw you over in New Zealand when you had a bunch of guys on the card there. You came to Melbourne. You're now going to the Gold Coast. You're in that library that's full of that work that you've dedicated your life to. Does Eugene Bareman ever switch off?
Two or three times a year, I switch off. Yeah. And I do a lot less of it now, but one of my biggest loves in my life is hunting. And so when I really want to switch off and get away from the sport, which isn't very often, I go hunting. I go bush. I go into the bush for 3 or 4 days or a week, and I take my rifle, a couple of good mates of mine, and we jump in the bush, go hunting, talk shit, miss a whole lot of animals, shoot a whole lot of animals. Yeah, that's what I do to switch off. And then obviously when I come home to my home environment, I spend time with my I got 4 kids, and I spend a lot of time with them and my wife. But even at home, I'm often in here just catching up on study, I guess, is where I spend most of my time when I'm at home. But I mean, Joel, you got to understand, I love doing this. I'm one of the, privileged people in this world that managed to make something he loved into his job. And so I don't go to work. I live the way I want to live. I'm lucky. I try not to make a big thing of that too often, but because a lot of people, like, a lot of loved ones around me, they don't get to do that. But I get to do it. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I get to do that. So I don't take it lightly. So, I do a lot of it and I love it. It's not a chore to me. So, what would I rather be doing? If people ask me an alternative, you said, "Oh, wouldn't you rather be doing something else other than watching old fights of, Steve Ersic and Anthony Smith?" The answer you get is, "Nah, I would probably be doing this, watching old fights of Steve Ersic and Anthony Smith." I'm doing what I want to do, so I'm in a fantastic privileged position. So I definitely don't take it for granted.
You said 2 or 3 times a year you get a chance to switch off. Are those specific dates or just whenever you're like, all right, it's time to go?
And normally, after Israel's fights, normally, because they just take so much out of you. He's a lot of hard work. No, he's not. He's not hard work. But yeah, normally after a big, a big fight, you just, mate, you just, it's 8 to 12 weeks of absolute chaos and complete dedication. So after those things, you can feel pretty drained and pretty overwhelmed. So I feel that's the best time to take off.
Eugene Bareman, I thank you so much for the time. It was an absolute privilege and a pleasure to speak with you today. What is on for the rest of your day?
Now back to the gym, just finishing up with you. But yeah, fantastic. I was glad that this is our first interview, or maybe second or
First,
first interview. You were fantastic when you came to the gym. You were very polite, nice, young, well-mannered gentleman.
I'll stop at you.
And so, yeah, I was like, let's do something, and here we are. We done it. So I hope it goes well. I hope people watch it. And it was very thoughtful. And thank you very much, Joel.
Thank you. It means the world.